If you were to ask me to pinpoint a specific time on the channel or a specific video or an episode of a particular series where I've said the words, I wish somebody would make a road-going Le Mans car, or maybe that more manufacturers would, I don't think I could name a specific episode, but I feel like I've probably said that a number of times, because it's definitely something that I feel very strongly about. So many small, low-volume exotic car companies, especially when it comes to the lightweight car bracket, seem to always aim for the same thing, to make a formula car for the street. And that's all well and good, I get it, the Ariel Atom, the Caterham to some degree, the Caparo T1, of course, is the ultimate example, but why does everyone always go for F1? Why don't some people at least aim to make, instead of that, an endurance prototype for the streets, a Group C car, a GT1, an LMP 900. Now, of course, we do have road-going cars in those categories, even as far back as the Porsche 917. There were a couple of street-registered versions. In the 90s, of course, we saw more than ever before with the Panos GTR1, the Lotus Elise GT1, the CLK GTR from Mercedes, etc., etc. So that was a great time for people like me who love those cars. However, once you reach the 2000s, especially the early 2000s when I would argue the LMPs were at their prettiest, everything between 1999 and 2006, with the culmination of what I would say is the prettiest LMP of them all, the Aston Lola BO960, why are there not more street cars that look like those? Because they look incredible. Or even Group C cars. Group C cars are legendary. 787B, Mercedes Saubers, they're awesome cars. Now, speaking of that Sauber, this particular company called LeBlanc, who are based in Zurich, Switzerland, their first car in 1999 was called the Caroline GTR. Doesn't exactly sound like an intimidating name, but if you look at that vehicle, it's very clearly inspired by those Group C cars, and if you look especially at the cockpit area of that car, it looks almost identical to a Mercedes Sauber. That's not a bad thing, except it's bright yellow, it doesn't have much of a livery, really, and it's a very fast, very lightweight car. However, that's not the car that we're talking about today. The car that we are talking about is the Mirabeau, and this is a car which a number of you guys have seen before, maybe just in a random Google search. Some of you are familiar with the vehicle, and there are certain episodes of this series where I really love looking into more in-depth background and research and story sides of cars that I already knew about. This one, for instance, I've known about it for years, but I just never really looked into it, and I'll be honest, it's because of the looks. I don't think it's a bad-looking car by any stretch. As I said, I wish more people would do stuff like this. I think the thing that kind of put me off is a car like this without at least some kind of livery looks so blank and bare, even in a great colour like yellow, which is my favourite colour anyway. It just looks like a borderline kit car, and I think that's always going to be a problem. And I don't say that to hate on the vehicle, I think for me it's just a fact. This car needs more. It needs more going on visually. It needs to have some kind of stripes or some kind of tribute paint to something. Even like the Ascari A10, for instance. Those two stripes on that car make such a difference to how good it looks and how iconic that livery is. Do a similar thing on this car. It could easily be far more impressive to look at, I think, and far less like a kit car. But overall, what is the story here? Because chances are you are not aware of a LeBlanc LMP1 Le Mans entry in bright yellow paint, and the reason why you're not aware of that is because, as far as I'm aware, they never did. And that's actually something that I love about the car. It was a street car first, despite somewhat ironically being built to FIA regulations anyway, so technically it wasn't too far off the racing mark. Although, in reality, you would have to very seriously neuter and ballast this car for it to be, again, ironically, slow enough to race, because this has way more power and far less weight than those early 2000s LMP cars were allowed to have. Most of those cars are looking at, 6 to 650 horsepower and about 900 kilos. This weighs 812. Almost a full 100 kilos lighter, and the power is huge. 700 horsepower. In fact, according to LeBlanc, it's over 700 horsepower. And here's the very interesting thing about that engine. You would probably think that they would source maybe a Chevrolet LS block or maybe an Audi V8 with a turbo. This car has the engine from a Koenigsegg CCR. No joke. What a choice of engine. I mean, what a brilliant choice to put an engine like that into a car like this. A 4.7 litre supercharged aluminium V8 with 700 horsepower, which technically is of course less than it produces in the Koenigsegg, which I believe is 806 horsepower in that car if I recall correctly. But still, in a car that weighs 812 kilos, that is more than enough power. It also puts out 630 pound-feet of torque. Again, massive for a car that doesn't weigh that much at all. This is essentially like something with the weight of a Lotus Elise and the power of a Pagani Huayra. What a combination to have. It is, of course, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, and much like the Ascari A10, it has a 6-speed sequential gearbox. You can actually opt in for a semi-automatic as an optional extra, but it will cost you an extra 52,000 euros. And as far as pricing goes, well, to be honest, it's all over the place. The car debuted in 2005, still hasn't had a huge amount of buzz despite being way later on now, almost 15 years on. And the pricing is, as I said, very difficult to pin down. Some people quote anything from $650,000, other places $750,000 or even $800,000. To be honest, all of those sound very believable for a car like this, which is super exclusive and very, very quick. 0 to 60, 2.7 seconds is the quoted time, and I gotta say, I believe them. Considering how light the car is, of course with rear-wheel drive, probably not quite as much downforce as an LMP car would typically have, well, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this thing is, let's say, prone to wheel spin, so you probably can't really give it the full beans off the line. But as far as top speed, well, it's a monster. It's not quite as quick as a Koenigsegg, but 230 miles an hour is real fast. In fact, this is one of the fastest cars that most people have never heard of. It's faster than the B Engineering Adonis, it's almost as quick as the Ultima GTR 640, and that is pretty nice territory to be in. It's far faster than the vast majority of iconic supercars from this era. I mean, think about other cars of the time. You had the Ascari A10, the Gumper Apollo, even some of my favourites like the MC12 and the SLR. Even stuff like the Enzo, which most people considered to be pretty much the quickest thing before the Veyron came out, even that pales next to this. The only cars that could beat this in the early 2000s, on a production scale at least, would be the Koenigsegg itself, the CCR, the McLaren F1 from way before, and of course the Veyron. That's pretty good company to be in for a car like this, which would never usually take on cars like that. To have performance which is even in the same ballpark as those vehicles is remarkably good. Now, I mentioned earlier on, of course, that the optional semi-automatic gearbox was an extra 52,000 euros, but that's actually not the only optional extra. It also has the curious option of a roof, which I've never actually seen, and I don't really see how that would work. Maybe they mean it's just a fixed hardtop instead, like a closed-top prototype, Bentley Speed 8 style. It's possible, I guess, but I've never seen that one. And other options include upholstered seats instead of bare carbon, and air conditioning, so win the Le Mans in style, and with a bit of comfort as well. Interesting options to have on a car like this, but once again, those are the kind of comforts and extras that you would never even need on a race car, let alone have, that on the road, they make all the sense in the world. It's the kind of car that you could, in a very 90s sense, potentially drive to the track, put different tyres on it, win, and then drive home. It's a shame that the regulations wouldn't allow that kind of thing, but it's a very McLaren F1-esque vehicle in that sense, and for that alone, I think it deserves a lot more credit. So essentially what you've got at the end of the day is a very pretty, blonde, Swiss exotic. Kind of like my ex. But overall, it's a car which is awesome, I think, in every way. Kind of let down by the fact that it has visuals which could easily be mistaken for a maybe much more affordable, let's say, kit car of the highest order. Not that that's an insult to kit cars, of course, it's just not necessarily the kind of looks that you'd want from your $650,000 supercar, but it's cool that Switzerland has a car like this, and if you're going to make a supercar, go big or go home. And they certainly did. What a remarkable car, fantastic performance, and again, this vehicle, the Mirabeau, definitely does not deserve to be an unsung hero. More people need to know about this car, so keep the conversation alive, tell your friends about it, and of course do some extra research yourself on Google, as always, if you want to maybe do some more digging about the car yourself as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.